Hi everyone, so this is our mini lesson on our writing prompt for this week. So we are compare and contrast. How has a change in climate affected wildlife in different locations? So before you can start writing, one, you have to understand what you are writing about. So if we think of our prompt, how has a change in climate? Okay, well, we have been reading about climate change. So this is just another way to write what we've been reading about. How has a change in climate affected wildlife? Okay, so we know that we are comparing and contrasting wildlife specifically in different locations. So when we write our paragraph, we're going to need to have two examples of wildlife that live in different areas. Okay, so that means wildlife that live in different areas. Okay, and specifically, we want to talk about how they were affected. So, what is happening? And I'm going to go, how have they changed? How have they changed? So these are the questions we're going to kind of think about when we are looking for our two examples. And then compare and contrast, we're going to have how are they different? And the same. So that is compare and contrast. Okay, so you have to understand the writing prompt before you can start writing. And we're not even going to start here in the planning of our writing until we actually have identified two examples of wildlife that live in different locations that we would want to write about. So I'm going to walk you through that process. You do not have to write about the two examples of wildlife that I find, because you might find something different that you want to write about. So I'm going to move this page and I'm going to use another graphic organizer like we did before. And the two examples of wildlife that I'm going to use are polar bears and coral reefs. I clearly remember global warming talking about climate change and how it has affected both of them. And so that's going to be my focus for the mini lesson. So I already filled in the middle. How are they alike? Both have been affected by climate change. Okay, so I want to find some information about polar bears. How has climate change affected polar bears? So I go back into my reading and I read about polar bears. Global warming has also changed the feeding patterns and behaviors of polar bears, walruses, seals, and whales. Okay, that first sentence tells me something has happened to polar bears. It may even impact their survival. Polar bears live only in the Arctic. They are completely dependent on the sea ice for all their life needs. In the winter, females give birth to cubs. The mother polar bear eats little or no food during the winter. As spring approaches, the bear family makes a run onto the sea ice to feed on seals, their main source of food. If the ice melts, their food supply will be cut off, and this will impact their survival. Okay, so we know that polar bears depend on ice shelf for food, right? So that's something that we've learned, okay, that they are depending on ice shelf for food. Now, we also know that if ice shelf melts, their food supply will go away. And it will impact their survival. So what does that mean? If your survival is impacted, that means, and they could die, right? Okay, so when we're thinking about how they're being affected, okay, then we write about, we know that they depend on this ice shelf for food, and global warming is occurring. If the ice shelf were to melt, their food supply will go away and they could die. Okay, so if you're, sorry guys, Ronan's up, and we also learned, I'm going to come up here. This is kind of like a key sentence if you're thinking about here, global warming has changed feeding patterns. Okay, so we know about polar bears. Okay, next we want to think about coral reefs. So I'm going to skip a couple pages. Okay, so coral reefs. Atmospheric warming can cause a rise in ocean temperatures and place coral reefs in jeopardy. Coral reefs are huge branching structures made of the limestone skeletons of tiny animals called coral polyps. Coral reefs are found in warm, clear, shallow oceans. They are home to many kinds of fishes, jellyfish, anemones, crabs, turtles, sea snakes, clams, and octopuses, and the algae that give their reefs their stunning colors. Most coral reefs are highly sensitive. Even small changes in water temperatures and in the amount of carbon dioxide in the water can kill algae in the reef. When the coral dies, it bleaches white. And then it gives us some information about El Nino. In just 1 year, about 1 in every 6 of the world's reefs was lost. If coral reefs die, then much of the animal life they support will be wiped out as well. Okay, so here's what we've just learned about coral reefs. Okay, change in water temperature places reefs in jeopardy. We know they are home to lots of sea life. Very sensitive. Change in temp and amount of carbon dioxide. Kills algae. Coral dies. All animal life it supports will die. Oh, I don't know if you can see all that. Will die too. Sorry, guys. Okay, so coral reefs. A change in water temperature places the reefs in jeopardy or danger. They're home to lots of sea life. Okay, so that's when a coral reef is healthy, when the ocean is where it's supposed to be. Okay, they are home to lots of sea life, but they're very sensitive. So any change in temperature, any change in the amount of carbon dioxide begins to kill the algae. And when the coral reef begins to die, all animal life it supports will die too. Okay, so it is highly affected by climate change. Not only does the coral reef die, but it also causes a change in the habitat or in that ecosystem almost, because those animals that live on the coral reef, they're either going to die for lack of what they need, or they're going to move out of that area to somewhere else. Okay, so this is the information we're going to use. We're going to take our information about polar bears and we're going to take our information about coral reefs, and we are going to now transfer that information. I need a flat surface. We're going to transfer that information into our graphic organizer. So this is where you need to do your planning. Okay, and it says on your copy, plan your writing using this graphic organizer. So we're going to take our information from our Venn diagram and we're going to place it in our boxes, and you're going to type right into your boxes. So here we're going to compare and contrast wildlife here. What is one example of wildlife that has been affected by climate change? Where is it located? What was it like before and after? So we didn't write where it was located. So we know, okay, polar bears. In the, I believe it was Antarctic. Okay, so that's what we're writing about, polar bears in the Antarctic. So we're going to write, what was it like before and after? So let's see. Depend on ice shelf for food. Melting shelf means less food for survival. Okay, so if this is what we know about polar bears, and guys, this is what I've taken from my Venn diagram. So polar bears are in the Antarctic, okay? We know that global warming has changed, and actually that's a really good sentence, you guys. So if we're thinking about what is happening, then we know that we could use that for our text evidence. Okay, so what does the text say? So the text says global warming has changed feeding patterns. Okay, so, and if you use the sentence, according to the text, global warming has changed feeding patterns. And we know that because the polar bears depend on ice shelf for food, and the melting shelf means less food for survival. Okay, so moving on to coral reefs. So in coral reefs, we're going to do the same thing, you guys. What is another example? What is another example of wildlife that has been affected? Yeah, come here. Oliver, okay, thank you, buddy. Okay, thank you. Go. Come back later. Okay, sorry guys. What is another example of wildlife that has been affected by climate change? Where is it located? Okay, so this one was coral reefs. And I don't know, we didn't write down, I don't know if it told us exactly where coral reefs. In the ocean? Yeah. So coral reefs in the ocean. That would be okay. All right. And what's going on with those coral reefs? Okay. We know that changes in temp and carbon dioxide can kill the coral reef. And we learned that if the coral reef dies, okay, so if the coral reef dies, then all animal life it supports dies too. Okay, so we know what's happened. Okay, if we're talking about how they have changed, so they are home to lots of sea life. Okay, so you could say coral reef is home to lots of sea life. However, changes in temp and carbon dioxide can kill the coral reef and kill the animal life it supports too. Okay, and then you find your text evidence. What does the text say? And there's some great text evidence in here. I'm looking at a sentence right now that says, even small changes in water temperature, basically what we have here, it gives us that exact sentence. So you can use an exact sentence to support. You can use the example of what happened with El Nino. So use El Nino example about how the coral reefs died. I mean, there's some great text evidence that you can use. You just have to go back and look for that text evidence. Okay, so I'm going to give you a good shot of this so that way you can go back and pause and use some of this information as you need it. I'm going to move to the second page very quickly. So you want to follow the paragraph structure. If you look at the paragraph structure, I've given you a topic sentence. Climate change has affected wildlife in different locations. Then you give your first example. One example of wildlife that has been affected by climate change is the polar bear, or polar bears have been affected by climate change. How is it affected? That's where you use your information. Put this information in sentences. Okay? Once you have your how they've been affected, you talk about, you give your text evidence, and then you show what you write, explain that change. So this is actually going to look a little backwards. Sorry, guys. So you'll give your example. Polar bears in the Antarctic have been affected by climate change. Okay. The text states, global warming has changed feeding patterns. This shows that the polar bear depends on ice shelf. You're going to have to figure out where you want to use this information in your sentences. These are just examples of what you can do. Okay, then you start your second example. I really want you to pay attention to your first example and then the sentence for your second example. Just like polar bears, coral reefs have been affected by climate change. And then go in and tell me about that change. Use your text evidence. Okay, and then last you have your concluding sentence. In conclusion, the changing climate has impacted wildlife all over the world or in different areas. Okay, so there's different things you can write. If you are unsure how to write your paragraph, you need to come see me tomorrow at 2 in the ELA support meeting, and we will work on this together. But pause the video for information if you need it. Use your paragraph structure. Come see me at 2 tomorrow to talk about your paragraph. Okay? Have a good one, guys. Thanks.